Over 2,000 years ago, yep, that long ago, Aristotle wrote on rhetoric, this exploration of how people actually persuade one another. At its heart, the book is really about what he called civic discourse, which sounds fancy but boils down to this: how we talk to each other in public life, how we argue, how we convince. The amphitheaters might have been made of stone back then, and today we're glued to glowing screens. But the bones of persuasion haven't changed all that much. Think about it. We live in this nonstop hurricane of information, ads screaming at us, headlines fighting for our eyeballs, even our friends trying to win us over in heated group chats. Everywhere you turn, someone's pushing a narrative. So, being able to persuade, but just as crucial, being able to spot when you're the one being persuaded. What blows me away about Aristotle is how he managed to take this messy, almost chaotic thing, persuasion, and slice it into neat categories without oversimplifying it. He called them ethos, pathos, and logos. These three aren't just separate tricks. They overlap, blend, and dance around each other. And when they're all working in sync, you've got a message that really lands, one that lingers. And here's the part I love. At the core of all three is this radical idea that persuasion isn't about smoke and mirrors manipulation. It's about connection, real human connection. Aristotle was saying, look, if you want to move people, you've got to speak to their values, stir their emotions, and yes, give them reasons that make sense. Honestly, when I think about arguments I've won and the ones I've totally lost, it always comes down to that. Not who shouted the loudest, but who actually got where the other person was coming from. Before anyone even bothers with the logic of what you're saying or lets themselves feel whatever emotional punch you're trying to land, they've got to believe you. That's ethos. Aristotle nailed this down ages ago. Persuasion happens whenever the speech is spoken in such a way as to make the speaker worthy of credence. If people don't trust you, forget it. And what's fascinating is he insisted that trust isn't just about your past reputation. It has to be built in the moment, right there as you speak. So how do you do that? Aristotle gave us three pillars: practical wisdom. Basically, do you actually know what you're talking about? Virtue. Are you decent, or at least playing fair? And goodwill. Do you genuinely care about your audience, or are you just using them? Miss even one, and the whole thing wobbles. I see this all the time in daily life. Take doctors, for instance. When mine tells me I need to change some habit, eat less sugar, exercise more, it's not just her medical degree that convinces me. It's the way she explains things clearly, how she seems invested in me rather than rattling off some script. But if she were vague, or acted like she couldn't care less whether I listened, her authority would vanish. Doesn't matter how airtight her science is. If I don't trust her ethos, I'm tuning out. Same thing on a smaller scale. If a friend swears I have to read this new novel, I'll probably check it out if I know they've got good taste and aren't just hyping everything they touch. That's wisdom plus a bit of virtue. And if I believe they genuinely want me to enjoy it, not just prove they're well-read, that seals it. Workplaces, too. I've watched team leaders try to rally their crew, and you can feel the difference. The ones who come across as confident, fair, and actually invested in their people. Folks listen, even follow with energy. But if it feels like lip service, or like they're only in it for themselves, resistance, half-hearted compliance at best. That's ethos in action. It's the invisible gatekeeper of persuasion. If the door doesn't open, your message, no matter how logical, no matter how beautifully delivered, just won't get through. If ethos is about trust, then pathos is about spark, the emotional current that can jolt an audience from politely nodding along to actually caring, maybe even acting. Aristotle got this. He wasn't naive about people being rational animals. He knew the truth. We're not robots. Our judgments shift depending on whether we're grieving or celebrating, angry or calm, feeling close to someone or holding a grudge. Pathos, in his view, is the art of nudging those emotions so the audience is primed to lean your way. In rhetoric, he even broke it down. Anger, fear, confidence, shame, pity, envy. He analyzed what stirs each one and how a speaker might bring them to the surface or quiet them down. And if you think pathos is old-fashioned, not at all. It's everywhere. Charities live and breathe on it. Ever notice how a children's hospital ad rarely starts with a pie chart? Instead, you see a kid hooked up to an IV and you hear about her resilience, her little victories. By the time the narrator says, with your help, you're already reaching for your wallet. That's pathos working its magic. Politics? Oh, it's drenched in it. A good speech doesn't just throw numbers at you. It stirs your pride, your fear, maybe even righteous anger. I still remember watching a campaign speech where the logic was flimsy at best. But the way the crowd roared, you knew the emotions had already done the heavy lifting. Even in the small stuff, apologies, relationships, pathos shows up. There's a huge difference between the cold, almost dismissive, I'm sorry you feel that way, and the warmer, more vulnerable, I'm so sorry I hurt you. That was never my intention. One just closes the door, the other opens it, makes space for forgiveness. I've been on both ends of that exchange, and let me tell you, the difference is night and day. But here's the tricky part. Pathos is powerful, which means it's also dangerous. If you use it to connect, to validate, to bring emotions in line with truth, that's ethical persuasion. If you use it to stoke fear, prejudice, blind rage, that's manipulation. The emotional lever is always there. The real question is, what are you doing with it? Logos is where persuasion gets its backbone. It's the appeal to reason. Aristotle thought this was the big one, the most important of the three. In his eyes, people ultimately want logic, proof, some kind of why that feels grounded. But don't picture him waving around dry equations or chalkboard scribbles. His idea of logic wasn't sterile math. It was practical, lived logic, the kind that connects to what an audience already believes, values, and considers plain common sense. Here's the thing. Arguments don't persuade just because they're logically airtight in some textbook sense. They persuade because the people listening care about logic. They want to feel like they're being rational, like the argument rests on familiar ground. Logos works best when it builds a bridge from what they already accept as true to what you want them to see next. That's the psychic connection Aristotle talked about. He broke it down into two main tools. First, the paradigm, reasoning by example, kind of like induction. It's basically saying, hey, it worked over there, so it'll probably work here too. If someone argues a new health policy will succeed in your city because it thrived in another, that's a paradigm at work. The catch? You've got to convince people the two places are actually comparable, or the whole thing falls flat. Then there's the enthymeme, the powerhouse move. It's deduction with a twist. You leave one of the premises unsaid because you're betting the audience already fills it in automatically. Like when someone argues, this policy hurts small businesses, so it's bad for our community. Nobody spells out the hidden step. What hurts small businesses is bad for our community, because it's assumed. The audience supplies that missing link themselves, which makes the conclusion feel seamless, almost obvious. It's sneaky, but in a good way. Courtrooms are full of this. Picture a lawyer saying, the defendant's fingerprints were on the weapon, therefore he handled it. The silent premise, fingerprints come only from direct touch, doesn't even need to be said aloud. Everyone just nods along. That's logos pulling the strings. Logos isn't confined to speeches or trials. It's in the everyday stuff too. You choose a laptop because the reviews are solid and the specs check out. You vote for a candidate not just because you like them, but because their policies actually sound thought through. You decide whether to trust a news story by checking if the evidence lines up. In all of these, logos is the framework, our way of justifying decisions so they feel not just instinctive, but defensible. Persuasion in our personal lives is usually quiet, almost invisible, but it's always there. And here, ethos is everything. The trust, the history, the little patterns of reliability we've built with family and friends, that's what gives our words weight. Think about a parent talking to a teenager about some tough decision. The advice isn't landing just because the reasoning makes sense. Though, sure, logos plays a role. It's landing because of the years of showing up, the care, the goodwill. If that trust is gone, even the sharpest logic is met with eye rolls or outright rejection. I've seen it happen. Honestly, I've done it, shrugged off perfectly good advice just because I didn't feel the trust was there. And then there's pathos, which, let's be real, does most of the heavy lifting in relationships. Arguments between partners, for example, rarely get resolved through bullet points and airtight reasoning. You can list grievances all day long. But nothing cracks open the wall like an emotional appeal, vulnerability, empathy, or simply tapping into shared memories. I miss how we used to talk. Simple, messy, but way more persuasive. Of course, logo sneaks in too in the smaller negotiations. Where should we go for vacation? Well, let's weigh the options: budget, travel time, activities. Or maybe you're planning finances with a partner, mapping out goals and spreadsheets. That's logos doing its job. But notice how it doesn't work alone. A spreadsheet feels cold unless it's framed by trust, ethos, and softened by emotional understanding, pathos. That's the beauty and the mess of persuasion in intimate spaces. The three appeals aren't neat categories here. They blur, overlap, depend on each other. A logical point hits harder when it comes from someone you trust, especially if it's wrapped in empathy. It's not just Aristotle's theory, it's dinner table reality. In professional settings, Aristotle's old principles don't just float in the background. They're right there, sharpened and used with intent. Take a job interview. You're not only rattling off your skills, you're trying to look competent, phronesis, come across as someone with integrity, arete, and hopefully show that you actually care about the company, eunoia. Sure, your resume is the logical proof, the logos on paper. But let's be honest. How many times has the candidate with the perfect qualifications lost out to the one who simply clicked with the interviewer? Happens all the time. Negotiations crank the stakes even higher. To win trust, you've got to show not just your credibility, but also your company's ethos again. You lay out the spreadsheets, forecasts, market data, all the logical ammo, logos. And then here's the subtle part. You weave in pathos. Maybe you frame the deal as a shared vision, a partnership, something bigger than just numbers. Or maybe you recognize the fears on the other side, because there are always fears, and you address them, not with cold facts, but with empathy. I've sat in meetings where that little shift, acknowledging what wasn't being said, turned the whole room around. Leadership? It's persuasion on steroids. A CEO announcing layoffs or restructuring can't just dump a chart on employees and walk away. Logos alone won't cut it. They have to name the anxiety in the room, the uncertainty, pathos, and then reframe it as part of a bigger, safer future. At the same time, they've got to project a steady, unshakable ethos, because if they don't look like they believe in the company's future, why should anyone else? If there's one place Aristotle's playbook is not just alive but turbocharged, it's media and advertising. Honestly, this entire industry is persuasion. Every billboard, every 30-second spot during a football game, every carefully crafted Instagram ad, it's a masterclass in rhetorical strategy. Ethos? Half the time, it's manufactured out of thin air. Slap a celebrity on a product, and suddenly we're supposed to trust it. A famous athlete holding a sports drink, do they even drink it? Doesn't matter. Their credibility, their goodwill with the public, bleeds over onto the brand. Or think of Apple. For decades, they've been curating this identity of sleek innovation, trustworthiness, user-friendliness. They've turned ethos into a brand personality. That's why people will camp outside stores for a new iPhone before they even know if the features are worth it. Pathos, though, that's the real engine. Rarely do you see ads rattling off specs in a monotone voice. Instead, they spin stories. They pull at emotions. A car commercial doesn't say engine 2.5 liters. No, it shows a family cruising through golden hour landscapes, windows down, kids laughing in the back seat. It's not selling a car, it's selling freedom, togetherness. Or look at anti-smoking campaigns. They'll show you a diseased lung or someone gasping for breath. Disgust, fear. That's pathos in overdrive. And sure, logo sneaks in here and there, but usually stripped down to something bite-sized. Whitens teeth by 50%. Voted #1 in customer satisfaction. Simple numbers, easy to remember. But those little facts almost always come wrapped in ethos. A smiling dentist in a white coat, and pathos, happy people flashing perfect smiles. Political campaigns? Oh, they're the full package. A candidate spends months, even years, building a persona that feels trustworthy, relatable, ethos. Then comes the emotional charge. Hope, pride, sometimes anger, poured into speeches, rallies, slogans, pathos. Finally, they sprinkle in policy proposals, stats, and plans to make it all look reasonable, logos. The most effective campaigns weave these three so tightly you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. And when it works, voters don't just think, they feel. And that's what moves them. The reason Aristotle's rhetoric still hits home isn't just because it's about speeches. It's because, at its core, it's about us, human nature in all its messy, predictable, beautiful contradictions. Sure, communication keeps evolving. Amphitheaters became printing presses, then televisions, now TikTok. But the psyche, the way we trust, feel, reason, that part hasn't budged much in 2,000 years. We're still drawn to people we think have character. We're still swayed, sometimes embarrassingly so, by emotional appeals. And at our best, when we slow down and think clearly, we still want to be moved by reason. And that's the thing. Aristotle didn't invent these principles. He wasn't pulling tricks out of thin air. He just noticed what was already happening, gave it a shape, a vocabulary. He held up a mirror and said, here's how humans persuade and get persuaded. I find that oddly comforting. Like these instincts, these patterns, are part of our wiring, not some modern manipulation. For me, the real power of his work isn't just in teaching how to speak more persuasively, though, yeah, that's useful. It's in teaching us how to listen better, how to catch ourselves when someone's tugging a little too hard at our emotions, how to spot when credibility is being faked, how to tell if the logic being presented is actually sound or just smoke. It makes us better citizens, not just better talkers. At the heart of it all, persuasion isn't abstract, it's relational. It's one person reaching another through trust, empathy, reason, all woven together. And maybe that's why Aristotle still matters. Because underneath the tech and the noise, it's still just us trying, sometimes clumsily, sometimes brilliantly, to connect. If any part of this resonated with you, share it in the comments. And if you enjoyed this journey of reflection, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Watch the next video.